Welcome to Medicine Redefined, a podcast focusing on helping you reclaim ownership of your health. I'm Dr. Darsha.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja. We're your hosts, here to challenge conventional practices and uncover the stories behind pioneers shaping the future of medicine. Our conversations not only focus on the individual level to dissect common practices for health optimization, but also zoom out to enhance systemic change.
Join us as we look to break the status quo, move the needle forward, and put the health back in healthcare.
Dr. Darsh, welcome back into the Progress Note, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
So, are you trying to get canceled? Tell us why it is that we're going to talk about today. Very interesting topic. I appreciated you recommending it, but what is that on the agenda and why is it important?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you got to watch some TV because I know you don't want to have time, and two, I don't know how much you watch TV usually.
I will not share with you how I completed some of those episodes and what I was definitely not advised, probably not legal. So no, definitely not legal.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, so we'll be talking about Fit for TV. This is the new Netflix documentary about The Biggest Loser and talking about the behind the scenes of how that show came to be. So this was a really interesting, hot topic documentary that came out. A lot of people from the medical community, but also just fitness community have voiced their opinions about what they saw. So just to give the, general idea to the audience and not ruin it for them, essentially, the show is about how the executive producers came up with the idea for The Biggest Loser, right? Trying to make it relatable. Obesity was on the rise. They then transitioned to how they picked the contestants, what the contestants actually went through that were behind the scenes that we couldn't really tell as we were watching the show. Some of the, crazy workouts, the supplements that they were taking, the diet, the opinion of the medical doctor on the show. And then we get to see the post hoc analysis essentially and see how these contestants fared in the long run. And then they interview them and they talk about almost their PTSD being on the show. So very interesting, just documentary overall, and really highlighting the business of TV.
Yeah, interesting things for me. Of course, familiar with the idea of The Biggest Loser. It was interesting more than just a TV show, right? It became just a cultural phenomenon. I mean, I do remember it being on cereal boxes, all that kind of stuff, The Biggest Loser diet, all that. But really interesting to see the background behind the scenes information and also hearing people's stories. Loved the people that they brought on. I wish we got a little bit more of insight into some of the professionals. So specifically one of the main trainers, because Jillian Michaels, I had heard of her, probably seen her picture once or twice, probably have never listened to her on any podcast or anything. And, getting my first exposure to her in this light, I don't think is probably fair. Because, whatever, I will spoil it for the people. They probably didn't paint her in the best light. And I'm curious what her take is and we know what her point of view is, because they especially got the other trainer who was very interesting, in terms of how he came across in the beginning and then towards the end. So I would have loved to see that as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that Bob Harper and Jillian Michaels were celebrity trainers, right? In California, they are looking to coach celebrities, probably specific athletes, and they're looking to profit, right? And that's what a lot of the motive was behind their reason for being on the show and trying to help in any possible way, right? To get these, I was going to say patients, but to get these contestants to lose weight. But what's interesting about Jillian Michaels, and, she declined to interview for the documentary. She's somewhat canceled, it seems like, from the fitness industry, medical industry for her takes. Or yet, I should say, her unwillingness to change her takes. So, I think we've all kind of had those notions back in the early 2000s, even early 2010s about, in order to lose weight, you just have to work hard and it's willpower. And, we're starting to understand more and more now with the research that, is it truly willpower? Are there environmental factors? I mean, we've talked about this in other episodes, that obesity is more than just a game of eating, right? And working out. And so she now kind of goes on these obscure podcasts and she still holds the same view. She's not a fan of GLP-1s because she's afraid of the muscle loss. She kind of holds the same views when it comes to dieting and things like that. And so she's caught a lot of heat for it. So I think that's why we don't really see her. I wonder what her respect level is with her peers as well.
Wait, she's not a fan of GLP-1s because of muscle loss?
Mm-hmm. She's afraid of all the side effects. That was like a clip I heard on a recent podcast that she was on.
Interesting. Just curious, what podcast was that?
I forget. It was not Howard Stern, but it was similar. It was like one of those news anchor type people. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to listen to it. What's that guy's name? Thomas Delore or somebody?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's interesting. I think I remember her on it and talking about
Hmm.
at least I guess this was a clip actually in the show or the documentary that they had clipped that and had her talking about it. So I want to maybe that'll give some insight, and I'm literally just curious to get her take on it. So that's also interesting because of their approach, right, to this aggressive weight loss, which, as you highlighted, it was just simple caloric restriction and extreme exercise. And they had the old school calories in, calories out model, probably a little oversimplified. And well, I want to be fair. Like it actually is quite simple if you think about it. The calories in, calories out. Like at the surface level, it is very, very simple. But then for some reason we talk about when you're adding individuals, when you're talking about sustained weight loss, which is really what the ultimate goal is. I think if you're interested in health, if you're interested in longevity, if you're interested in helping people, and we want to be very, very sure is when you watch this show, no matter what type of background you're coming from, if you're actually coming from somebody who's passionate about health, if you're coming from somebody who has a personal story with obesity, you've struggled with that, or have people in your family, you might have some real strong feelings about this. Just recognize that this is entertainment. It was not supposed to be educational. I think they admitted the fact that, I mean, did they use the word B as in billion? Was it $1 billion revenue? Or I know certainly in hundreds of millions in terms of profits that they made.
I think
Over
it
the
might have been
17
billions once they got the licensing deal and they were able to put on everything. Yeah.
Wild. Like that is crazy to me. So purely entertainment. I do not think, despite that one producer, I forget his name, who got the idea because the story goes that this gentleman, I guess he's the trainer, he walked out and he saw on a bulletin board somebody had written, looking for a trainer to help save my life, respect obese person, or something to that too. And that really gave him the idea. And towards the end, he tries to spin it as such as, hey, I'm trying to like help people. And that's why we did the show. That was my idea. Like, it's not against obese people. And then you think about some of the things, the tactics they actually used to make it, entertaining, so to speak. And it was like, I think cruel and psychological warfare would be terms that come to mind for me, which, I'm happy to get into. But that's kind of the general, I think, overview from my perspective is we recognize how complex obesity is. And sure, hindsight's 2020. I'm sitting in 2025, almost 2026, talking about an idea that people had implemented in 2003. We've learned so much in that 22-year window. Again, we talk about knowledge doesn't go up like a linear. It's more of a hockey stick, right, in terms of how we've learned. But I think humanity still existed back then.
Right. Yeah, good point. Now I'm curious, did you watch the show when you were younger?
No, I've never seen the show.
Seen it? Okay. I thought it was great. I used to watch it. Yeah. Yeah, I did.
You did?
Yeah.
So
I think like high
how old
school.
were you when you watched it?
Probably, yeah, like 14, 15 years old when I was kind of saw it. And, being an athlete myself, that's why I'm surprised you didn't watch it. Because like being an athlete, it was kind of that, it kind of almost gave you pride in the sense of when you're watching, you're like, oh, I can do all that. And like this moral hierarchy in a way, I guess I can say. And I think that's what the show almost made the contestants feel, right? Is that, hey, you're obese. You're quote unquote on the lowest end of the totem pole, and we're trying to make you lose weight so you can reach higher in society. And when you talk about psychological warfare and some of the temptations, quote unquote, that they put through for them, I think the entertainment value there, just like a lot of these other reality TV shows, is having the viewer compare their life to what you're seeing on TV. And again, back then in high school, I didn't really see the business side of things. So you kind of just took it at face value of, oh, these, people are working out very hard. They're trying to lose weight. There's some inspirational component to that. And so you're kind of cheering on for certain people. They create drama and you kind of follow them for however long the show went. And I think what's absurd is like, I think they said one person in like 6 months lost 200 plus pounds.
Like, yeah.
Holy crap.
I think that's that guy, Danny Cahill, season 8. He was a champion of just overall. I think, oh man, I had it somewhere over here. I think he started at like 430 something and came down to 190 or something like that.
That's absurd. That's absurd.
Which is, yeah, absolutely.
In
absolutely
6 months.
I want to just to help you out a little bit, because I know that's a soundbite right there that somebody's going to cancel you for, is you're not saying you came from this standpoint where you believe that obese people are you're saying that's what the show made it out seem like, right? For the viewer at home.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just watching that show now and looking back in terms of how they painted it, I think they tried to, for the most part, keep it neutral. It was interesting. They would bring the producer, they bring the contestants and give different, and they brought contestants who spoke highly of it. There were those two sisters, I think. They were like, this is the best thing that's ever happened in my life, right? Obviously that changed their life for the better. And they're still doing well in terms of their metabolic health, or so it seems, and at least the physical appearance. But then you had other contestants who were like, that's the worst thing. F that person, this, that. But generally looking at it, so that one specific person that you talked about, yeah, so he ended up, let's see here. I have the exact numbers for you because I remember writing this down because I was like, man, this is crazy. So yeah, so 430 started off in season 8, went down to 191 pounds. And then, within the next couple of months, over the next couple of years, I should say, he regained 295 pounds back up again. And so he actually went like beyond where he was, which was insane. I think he even talked about it. He had to do plastic surgery because his skin, he has so much, all that he had to get addressed. And a lot of these people really did benefit, despite telling a story that how it didn't work out for him in the long run. In that time, they were famous. I mean, there were some people going on. Was that Tracy, a girl who almost died?
Yeah.
Wild that she did that. Well, she was in Jay Leno show, right? She was on the Today Show. They were going to all these kinds of places. So it's tough because when you look at it from just her lens, like I really was buying into her story, right? So she was doing everything possible. She was coming from a very difficult home situation, and there was so much complexity and stuff going on that was affecting her mental health that she thought this was her escape. I think those are her words. And then pushed herself beyond the limit where she almost died. Afterwards, that reward from, going on these shows, still doing well, still losing weight with purely just diet because she didn't end up exercising. Some people who profited off that show could come back and say, well, actually, I know you were saying that we mistreated you and stuff, but you actually did quite well. Like, you were famous for a while. Denny, we talked about him. What are your thoughts about that? Like, does that absolve those people from doing some of the tactics that they did?
Yeah, see, this is where it's interesting, right? Because they made them sign the contract, and a lot of them were saying, oh, I need to get a lawyer. And they were pretty much convinced not to get a lawyer and said, hey, you have a deadline of 5 hours to get this signed. You're not going to find a good lawyer in 5 hours to go over the contract and see exactly what's in there and what all the clauses are. So do I think it's not necessarily, I don't think it necessarily absolves all the psychological trauma that they probably put on these people. It was interesting because I was on Threads and somebody wrote a post saying, I have no experience with obesity. He was talking about this Cahill guy, but you would think once you regain about like 70 pounds, something's wrong. And everyone's like, okay, first of all, you have no experience with obesity. But even if we put that aside, it's this understanding that these people didn't know how to lose weight, right? They were just kind of forced in a very quick shock manner to say, hey, you're going to burn 8,000 calories a day and only take in 800. Like, that's not a proper way of losing weight, right? I mean, we talked about this with Joseph Reese and how he talks about how he'll do a calorie restriction for 1 week and then the next week maintain, and then he'll alternate because he wants to preserve that muscle and look at it in the long term. And so, of course, no, these people don't know once you reach 70 pounds what to do because they were never actually taught properly what to do. They were taught the theoretics of it. But, that's where I think, you can make a lot of money, but what's all that money going to do if you don't have your health? So,
yeah. Yeah, as the saying goes, people who have their health, they have 100 problems, but if you don't have your health, you only got one problem. Yeah, what you're talking about is behavior change. There's no behavior change. There's no education actually happening. It seems like those conversations, despite the Dr. Huizenga, his name is, the conversations he would have, he'd say, hey, this is the 30, 45-minute session that they would give him. Like, you're going to teach metabolism to somebody in that short period. And then the trainers would come back and be like, I know the doc said this, but here's what you're actually going to do. Which, again, crazy to me.
Don't you think it's wild that they wouldn't allow the doctor to talk to the trainers? Like, they had no interaction.
Yeah. So he said that, he said that towards the end they allowed him just because he threatened to quit. I don't know what his, I feel for him. Again, I don't know either, right? The way that he painted his story is that he quit the Raiders because of some maybe nefarious processes with those and OJ Simpson, that kind of stuff was going on. And, he made it seem like he was trying to do his best, but I also don't know. I'm sure he probably got really rich from it too. I just don't know much about him. I haven't looked him up. Right. I also don't know if he actually genuinely believed that 30-minute conversation he's going to have with these trainers, that these trainers are actually going to listen to anything he has to say.
No, they were on their own path. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's like a whole concept of motivational interviewing. Like if somebody's so close-minded, like what do you think you're going to, like, do you just get to sleep better at night because you feel like, quote unquote, you've done your part?
Said something. Yeah.
That's what I would ask him. I would ask him, did you think you were going to make a difference with these trainers?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Bob Harper straight out said, like, no one's going to tell us what to do when it came to diet and training. So
yeah. On that note, him talking about how most doctors have a God complex, and then talking about how if it wasn't for a doctor right there pounding on my chest, I'd be dead. And I was like, okay, you want to take that back?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So get, one of the reasons you bring up a really good point, right? So people regain that weight, and you've also touched on GLP-1 agonists in terms of some of their side effects. And we also see this. I've been on record multiple times, and I'll stand by this. I think since the time that I've been practicing and invested in health, I think this is the most revolutionary drug, and it's probably going to be for a long time. I think we'll see long-term what the side effects, long-term consequences will be. But I think for now, here's what I'll say though. It was almost like a metabolic ward study, right? These people were in a controlled environment. They were completely removed from their daily stressors. They didn't have their jobs. They didn't have their families. They didn't have to worry about all those types of things. You were in a crazy boot camp for 6 months at a time. And it was a very military operational style. No, a lot of people will actually scoff at and point out like some of the vile things the trainers would say to them and how they would berate them. But is it really different than military, like Hell Week would be?
Exactly.
I imagine Hell Week would be a lot worse. And for some reason, we think that's okay, right? So what, and I'm curious to get your take on that, because most people, if they see that happening in Hell Week or any other military movie, like, yeah, we want those people to be tough. But here it's like, ooh, that's like, I mean, you both signed up for this. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'll throw it back at you in a second too, because I'm interested in your take because you used to train people. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I have no issue in a way of if you're trying to lose weight and you're trying to get somewhere, having that type of component when it comes to training. I think what I'm starting to learn though is that people respond in different ways to different things, right? I think in the military, what people would say is you're always going to be in a stressful environment, right? These people are going to go home. These people aren't here to sign up to fight for a country. They're here fighting for themselves. So in the military, you're kind of throwing a lot of this stress. You're throwing a lot of this verbal abuse. You're trying to get the heart rate up. You're using psychological tactics. You're trying to break them down as if they're going to be a prisoner of war. Whereas these contestants, some of them might respond very well to that. I'm somebody who responds very well to if I'm running and you tell me and you start cars, I'm going to run faster, versus if someone's very lovey-dovey to me and like, you got this, how can I treat you now? I'm not going to respond to that. And I realize the way I train people or the way I talk to people too, if I want to get them better, is a little bit more direct. And I'm starting to realize that I should probably analyze people before I start, trying to coach them in a certain way. But I also realize this, what's interesting is when me and Mira watched this documentary, we both realized that from our coaching perspectives, we inherently like to work with people who are already at a certain stage, right? So for instance, we like to do executive coaching, executive leadership. If it came to kind of like functional medicine type things, already like to work with optimizers who are already at a certain baseline of health. Because I know myself and I don't technically have that great of a threshold for patience when it comes to certain things. And then I feel like I'm going to fail. So to set myself up for better success, as well as the person across from me, there has to be this match. And that's where I look at this and I say, well, you have Jillian Michaels, you have Bob Harper, who are up here training celebrities. And then you have contestants who may not know at all how they respond to certain criticisms and stuff. So there probably was a big mismatch for a lot of the contestants.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much I want to comment on here. So we talk about this offline all the time. Art of coaching, right? Coaching 101, our favorite thing to do. I agree with your point 100%, right? So different people respond to different coaching styles, different coaching cues even about that. Again, here's where I think the documentary probably didn't do it justice. Most of the coaching tactics they showed were them screaming at them, telling them are you going to die? No, then I don't want to hear it. Some version of that. It was a very extreme military-esque type stuff. There were a few clips where they showed them talking to them gently and motivating them, but majority of them was like yelling at a boot camp. And so that would suggest that that was their coaching style, but we don't know that because, again, first of all, we didn't see the whole picture for 6 months. What happened? Is that always their coaching style? What was the balance? It was 60-40. Was it 80-20? I don't know. So, but if it was just that, then that would be hard. I mean, Joelle, that one person, like she was explicit. Hey, I shut down. I don't respond to this. But the Bob Harker kept going at her, right? He had no threshold. He also wasn't prepared for that. I think he explicitly said, I had never worked with an obese person my entire life. This is my first like entry point into that. And again, it's just a completely different mentality. I remember a coach of mine when they were teaching us how to work. I remember him saying, and I found this to be true. When we were working at Parisi, we were working with people kids as young as 7, children as young as 7 years old. And that's a second grader, and Olympic level athletes and everybody in between. NFL athletes for professional baseball worked with that. Remember him saying like working with Olympic level athletes is actually quite easy because they've got the genetic lottery. They're so intrinsically motivated. You kind of don't have to, you just have to just guide them and get out of the way, make sure you don't hurt them, and just be there for that. Whereas a 7-year-old, especially a 9-year-old who is there in class because mom put him in soccer, who doesn't really want to be there, getting that person to be fired up to be there and want to come back next time, that's like a next level thing. That was really exciting to me. And that's like, are you familiar with Martin Rooney?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So he's, again, Parisi, he worked with a lot of UFC folks. He's like the art of coaching type stuff, training for warriors. He's big into that stuff. He would talk about like, if you act the way you want to become, you become the way you act. He always said that to me. And he was like, he would show up. He was like, even if you're not fired up, just act like you're fired up in front of, especially these young children, these high school athletes. If you're fired up, ready to go, eventually that energy is going to be infectious and then they're going to get fired up and stuff. And eventually, like, you will become fired up because your own energy will be infectious to you. I find that to be really interesting, hard to execute sometimes. But I think where I'm going with this is, first of all, we didn't have enough of a sample size with them. And number two, or the other counterpoint that I can make if I am arguing against that is maybe these coaches didn't give a shit about that. Right? Like when they were hired, the name of the game was your objective is for them to lose as much weight. Like that's the game. The game is not for these people to not have cardiovascular disease. The game is not to coach. That wasn't the game. Game is weight loss. Like that is the objective. We don't care if you're coaching. We don't care what tactic you're using, right? As long as it's not illegal, which I guess they had predefined rules for that. Caffeine was off. Crazy to me. Right? Caffeine pills were off. Caffeine pills were off, right? So that's the thing. So it's like, is Jillian Michaels actually a good coach? I don't know. The data that I have from this documentary suggests not so much. Bob Harper, not so much, but maybe they're phenomenal coaches. But when it came to this, like that was the tactic that they knew for the objective at hand.
It's a good point, man. It's a very, very good point. How did you feel when Joelle had to do 30 seconds on the treadmill and like stopped at 27 every time? Like, what did you feel internally?
I was rooting for her to do it. I thought she was going to get through that last one. It seemed like when he was getting exciting, he got down to like 6.5 and she stopped. I did feel bad when she quote unquote gave up.
Or feel like were you angry inside at all? Like, why couldn't you just do it? Like, did you ever like, or were you analyzing like, oh, I get why she couldn't, like she had just had this governor in her mind that she put the brakes on and I'm just not going to do like a self-sabotage.
So I had a biased view because we're listening to present Joelle tell us how she responds to coaching and what she doesn't respond. And then they're showing us that older footage, right? So I have that extra data point in that moment. I don't know what it would be like. So it made 100% sense to me because you know how the saying goes is like, I'll run through a wall for my coach. You know, people say that I love my coach so much, I'll run through a wall. Well, what those people are saying is I trust this coach. This coach, Joelle had zero trust in her coach. Zero. So you saw how fast she was running, dude. She could have ran for another 4 seconds, but she would stop because she didn't trust her coach. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like she's physiologically capable of doing it. It was just a matter of trust. Right. And obviously that guy, for whatever reason, they couldn't connect. And because they couldn't connect, is like they couldn't have that therapeutic alliance that Dan Pope talks about. If you can't have therapeutic alliance, like you're going to be unsuccessful. And what Jeremy Boyd talked about this too, right? He often says that, in fact, that might be the most important thing to build when you're building this coaching relationship, is that therapeutic alliance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no surprises there.
That's a good point. Yeah. I'm trying to think how that relates to our patients too, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
for that step one before I go anywhere else.
I looked more into the metabolism is broken stuff that the New York Times and all that stuff talked about. So Kevin Hall, Kevin Hall, right? Famous metabolic researcher.
I don't know where he went now.
Yeah, we don't know where he is now. R.I.P. Kevin Hall. No. We think he's still alive. But Kevin Hall, for those who don't know, is probably one of the most prolific metabolic researchers in the last 20 years, I would say. Spent a lot of time at the NIH studying metabolism, has done a great deal of stuff, and very, very well respected by most people, not just like evidence-based academics, but everybody, even bro science folks. The study that they kept referencing was this metabolic study that he did. So he did a 6-year study, right, where he looked at, the title of it's published in Obesity in 2016, Persistent Metabolic Adaptation, 6 years after The Biggest Loser. And so what they wanted to see was like, how have the changes been made? What's stuck? What's not consistent, in terms of their weight loss, and how have they responded over 6 years? And what we found was, it was a very small study. So from season 8, they took 14 contestants. They tracked them over that 6 months. Over 6 months, the average weight loss over 30 weeks was 128.6 pounds, but their resting metabolic rate had dropped about 610 calories per day on average.
Damn.
So it's a pretty significant drop on a daily RMR, resting metabolic rate. 6 years later, when they rechecked these folks, it was still suppressed by about 500 kilocalories a day, even though most of them have regained weight. So that's what really sucks, right? And that's where it came up like, oh, your metabolism is still broken and stuff. So that slowing of resting metabolic rate, not just a short-term adaptation, but it persists long-term. Now, the other thing interesting, leptin, you're familiar with that hormone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for those who are not familiar, leptin is a hormone that signals satiety. So the more leptin you have, the less hungry and cravings you're going to be. What's interesting about leptin is primarily secreted by your fat cells. So the more fat cells you have, the higher leptin levels are. What he had noted that the leptin levels had also crashed. So in that 6-month period, the average leptin levels were 41.1 nanograms per milliliter, dropped down to 2.5 nanograms per milliliter in that aggressive. And that's actually one of the biggest reasons why aggressive weight loss is because, you have this internal drive that goes bananas. Like Joe was talking about, Joe Freese, all you can think about is food now. So for a population such as the subject population in this discussion here, who already has excessive amount of food noise, we know this, who already struggles, who potentially doesn't have good behaviors, maybe a lack of knowledge, but probably some of the aforementioned things. And now you are setting them up for failure even more so by tuning the wrong hormones up, and the right ones are turning down. So there is just no this thought about what long-term health is. It's just, I think probably some people already knew this. I gotta say that I gotta give Jillian Michaels and Bob Harper a little bit more credit. I'm sure they had some understanding of this stuff, maybe a little bit. They had to. But in this study, even 6 years later, the leptin levels were 33% below baseline. So that's what, so now these people are like, that I believe those headlines. Like, even though you and I talk about some headlines as, hey, it'll break your metabolism, it's kind of true. I'd be curious where they're at now, but it's kind of true.
Yeah, essentially yo-yo dieting, right? Or crash diets is why people gain weight and then they get the fat on again, and then it's harder. So you're kind of just in this constant cycle, but you end up with more weight than you previously had when you had that weight gain. So I'm curious, and this is why I'm really excited to hopefully get a GLP-1 provider on. Do we know how GLP-1 affects that metabolic rate, or, is it dependent on the dosage in terms of a quicker weight loss versus a steadier one?
So that's a great question. I don't think it directly affects metabolic rate per se, right? So it's not going to necessarily increase energy expenditure. The primary mechanism for it working is it's working on the satiety hormones, right? And it's working on gastric motility. And so if you don't have a lot of gastric motility, you don't have things moving, you're not going to necessarily have some of those hunger signals. And therefore, indirectly, it's going to work on those hormones, right? So it's not going to dial up because you're going to feel full. And so really the main way, in my understanding, is that it works is it's a reduced intake of energy. And people will talk about this, right? So so there are multiple ways to take it. The most popular way is a weekly injection. There is an oral pill available, another one coming out soon. But the weekly injection, the first couple of days, really 24 to 36 hours after the fact, you have peak, pharmacodynamics. So the peak response from the medication. For some people, it might be a little bit longer, some a little shorter. You have prime nausea, prime constipation. That's where dehydration issues become. So at that point, it's like if you stuff yourself, you're going to end up with gastroparesis in the ER. So the appetite can be really, really low. But toward the rest of the week, depending on how fast your body clears it, you're going to start taking more and more and more. But what it shouldn't affect is your activity levels, right? Like, yes, nausea potentially can have a secondary, but it's not affecting that. So we could do, oh man, I'm actually excited to get it. So I won't get ahead of ourselves because again, we are looking to bring somebody on so we can dive deeper into this. But this concept of cycling, at least that I do with my patients, just, weekly cycling, and even just adjusting the dose that you don't necessarily need to take it every 7 days. Sometimes you can take it every 6 days, maybe 8 days, depending on how you're responding. Other tactics that I thought about, listening to Alan Aragon talk about this on a different show, is, if you want to extend that maintenance phase, well, this is a little hack for people that I'll give you. If the insurance company is still, sending it to you every week and you want to get into a maintenance phase, you can actually spread out the dosing and save more money. I'll talk about this in more detail later by breaking into maintenance phases and stuff. So GLP-1s are unique in the sense that they're just really turning down those food noise and the lack of control. I think what's not been studied and it hasn't gotten FDA approved is like some of these binge eating disorders, which are a real problem. I think that's where going to be incredibly powerful. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, man, that's like a 3-hour episode. I got a lot of questions, just because there's so much nuance, right? That with GLP-1s that you can go in any direction with it. So definitely excited for when that happens. Alan Aragon, we should get him on the pod. He's a good voice in the space. So
he might come on. He actually might.
Oh yeah, he replies on Instagram. So yeah.
Yeah. What's actually interesting that I would talk about this. Are you familiar with the set point theory?
Kind of, yeah. Like, isn't it like relatable to basal metabolic rate? Like if you,
weight loss, right? So I think historically we used to think about that so your set point in terms of where your body is going to come back to is kind of predetermined based on a variety of factors. So your genetics, your muscle mass, et cetera, but really a lot of it has to do with genetics as well. And, I think everybody, as you get to an adult life, you kind of hover around the same weight and slowly we keep increasing. And most of that is because our activity diminishes over time. We've learned not necessarily that metabolic rate slows down. And what we used to think that it was primarily dictated by weight, just absolute mass. Stephan Guyenet, or I think I hope I'm saying his name right, an obesity expert. I think he does a lot of public health stuff. He doesn't say that the set point is necessarily more for weight. It's actually a set point for fat mass. I find that to be particularly interesting. And I think that is more concerning when you are thinking about these anti-obesity medications, because if these anti-obesity medications are getting rid of your lean body mass and you are retaining more fat mass, your set point might not necessarily go down, right? So that actually could be beneficial. So maybe losing some lean body mass is not the worst thing in the world, right? So again, you're going to have a hard time finding people who are proponents of like muscle mass than me. Actually, I lie. There's lots of people out there, bodybuilders and people who do drugs, you're going to find. But I'm a big proponent, and we talk about this particularly as physiatrists, how important that is with sarcopenia. But I think when we look at just absolute mass over time, like you can afford to lose some muscle mass if they're going to bring the person down. And if we actually believe that the set point is not necessarily based on absolute weight, it's based on fat mass. Because if relatively speaking, you still have overall less weight and now more fat disproportionately, but your set point hasn't changed, you can work with that. Does that make sense? Am I making sense there?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Cool.
Definitely. It's interesting, man. Cool. Anything else that is on your mind in regards to documentary, obesity topic?
We didn't talk about the temptation stuff. That was the most banana stuff to me. And I'm talking about putting them in a room with just like treats and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if they did that every season. They didn't talk about
I think they did, for what I recall. I remember watching the seasons here and there sporadically, and there were always these like challenges that you would do, and they would always have a room full of the pastries and fast food and everything.
Do you remember watching that? like live?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
What were your
Thought it was
thoughts then?
normal, completely normal, right? Because the thought back then was like, oh, the reason they're obese is because of everything that's in front of them,
Because
right?
they don't have control.
And they don't have control. And then other shows like Big Brother, Survivor, like they all had these challenges, right? That was like the pinnacle of reality TV back then, was you had to go through these challenges, and they would always have groups and you would separate the groups. And so it was just like this normal way of watching TV. So I don't think I really thought anything of it until, yeah, you mentioned like, hey, you can see your family if you eat the most calories, right? So like
That
they're teaching
Yeah.
self-sabotage, right? And what matters
that's really messed
more.
up.
And it's insane. Yeah.
That's so I would say out of the whole documentary, if I had some strong emotions, it was during that part. It's like, listen, if you eat the most, you can go see your family. Like that's some like I don't yeah, that's the one part I didn't necessarily agree with.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's essentially putting humans in a zoo, right? Like you said, a metabolic ward. Yeah, absolutely. It's like a zoo though, right? Like you're feeding them, then you're making them lose weight. Like what it's the guinea pig at that point. And seeing what else you can, yeah, it's wild.
Well, if we're gonna use your zoo metaphor, it's almost like if you're putting I'm scared to even say this, but like if you are just saying that, like if you had some animals and you put them in a zoo, and then you put like an electric fence around them, and then you tease them to go to the electric fence, right? Like that's what it would be. God, I told you we're gonna get canceled, but
Baby.
yeah. So that was the part that I really didn't like, and I again, you were 14 where you watched it, so you it's different. I have a family. I know what it feels like when I travel for a conference for 4 days, 5 days, and I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I away from my daughter for 5 days? Again, these people are really clearly struggling. We have more empathy. It didn't feel like there was anybody with like empathy there. But then again, that's not the bottom line, right? Like they're trying to make money. They probably had investors. It's the same conversation we have when insurance companies aren't interested in making people healthier or deny necessary treatments. It's just like they have fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, not to make people live longer or be healthier. I guess it's the same in a sense.
Exactly. Same concept, different game, right? So I
Yeah.
do have one last question for you, at least. So this is like meta inception here, right? But like Netflix itself is on TV and media, and they're making a documentary on this. So how much did they have to play the game themselves to put The Biggest Loser in a spotlight in order for them to make money off this?
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about that. I was like, first of all, would we be able to do anything like The Biggest Loser in today's day and age? No shot, right? You don't
Yeah,
think?
no. I think those days are done, man. I was watching like Hot Chicks, the movie, and I was like, wow, half these lines would not fly in today's world. And that was what, like early 2000s.
That's true too. I was talking to a patient about Tropic Thunder. You ever seen that movie?
Yeah. There's no way that stuff would fly.
There's no way. I'll tell you why I brought that up. It was a really funny thing I saw on Instagram with Robert Downey Jr. But yeah, that wouldn't work. But yeah, Netflix. Yeah, I think it's like number one hit thing on Netflix right now in terms of getting that. You know what? If you have some time, I want to talk about, because we both listened to The Aesthetic Revolution, the concept of Dr. Mike. Had you finished that yet?
Yeah, I listened to it.
For those who don't know, Dr. Mike, I don't know what the Dr. Mike, like the Dr. Mike was the
Israetel.
actual doctor.
Yeah.
No. Who's the other name?
Varshavski.
Varshavski. Dr. Mike Varshavski, the handsome doctor in New Jersey, not the other handsome doctor in New Jersey, not me. He had Dr. Mike Israetel on the show recently talking about the aesthetic revolution. And that's a concept that, I guess, a book that Dr. Mike Israetel is writing. I thought that was one of the most enjoyable episodes that I had, because there was a lot of deep stuff and really strong takes that he had in there. I know Dr. Mike was pushing back about some of the strong takes that he had and how he was condoning some of this really strong thought process about just focusing on your aesthetics rather than necessarily health. And I wanted to get a sense of like where you were after that conversation. How did that make you feel?
I think it's tough. I think I found myself agreeing to a lot of what Mike Israetel, the guest, was saying. And I just thought about it from the lens of like growing up and what he was talking about in regards of, these kids are unattractive in a way, and there's a social hierarchy, and you learn that stuff pretty early, right? And I think being a brown guy in the US, it's difficult growing up in going through elementary school and middle school, and this is not to bring race or anything in it, but it's when you're, I'm trying to word this in a way that's, like appropriate and whatnot, but
we're walking around landmines right now.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's definitely difficult, I think. And you can clearly see that social hierarchy based off attractiveness, right? So then you find yourself trying to fit in different niches, right? And this, of course, depends on what city you're in, what school, all that. So athletics was like the one thing for me then, right? To like really get into. So I found a lot of what he was saying to be true in regards to the way people grow up, the mental health, the way that they look at themselves and the self-identity. And what's interesting though is, you get to a certain age and now we're all like, do we get this procedure done? What does it mean to get a procedure done? If I get fillers or I get Botox, does that make me quote unquote fake? How do people look at that? And when we talk about the aesthetic revolution, there's just aesthetics has taken off, right? I mean, so many of these cash-based providers now do aesthetic clinics on the side because that's what people are asking for. And he even talks about how we've gotten to a point now where it is so minimally invasive, you can't even tell if someone's gotten work done anywhere. And he's gotten his obliques done, right? Because he realized he had a lot of water mass in them and loose skin. But I kind of think about when you said, hey, on The Biggest Loser, if they're making money off the show, is that such a bad thing, right? And I think about it from the perspective of if you're getting things done and it makes you look more attractive, and we know there's a bias out there for attractive people, right? This is well known. Attractive people tend to get more favors done for them. People tend to say yes to them a little bit more. So you're kind of playing that game. I don't know if you know Michael Smoke on Instagram, Higher Up Wellness. So he's a pretty popular account now, tries to keep it real. And he even says, he's like, why not try to get in the best shape of your life and play that game? Because when you're more attractive, you will see your life elevate, not just, through self-reflection, but you'll see how the world changes in response to you. So a lot of that, I think, is necessary for a lot of people, or that's why they at least tend to go down that route of getting things done and getting work done, because it's hard. I mean, yeah, there's one aspect of the self-reflection, but the other of, hey, I want the world to treat me differently. I'll leave it at that. I don't know. A lot to go down.
Reconcile that with the Stoic philosophy. You've read Marcus Aurelius, you read Epictetus, you've read some of this stuff. Reconcile what would Ryan Holiday say about that?
Yeah, this is interesting. Man, from a Stoic philosophy, I think so. Stoic philosophy is very rooted in self-reflection and almost not. It's about detachment too, right? It's about detachment from the world, the worldly possessions, the notoriety that comes from certain things, and you're doing the work, just do the work. So this is where I think it's interesting, right? Because Stoic philosophy, when it was written and talked about, it was written at a different time. Right? There wasn't as much global interconnectedness, I think.
But do you think aesthetics didn't matter?
I don't think they mattered as much.
Well, just because you didn't have as much direct feedback. Like you didn't have millions of people commenting on you as opposed to 10s or 20s.
Right. And I think the industries were different back then, right? Like we use a lot more of our critical thinking and communication now, whereas back then it was a lot more labor and merchants and selling. So maybe if you were a salesman, it would probably matter more. More attractive people maybe, went into sales or had better businesses. Whereas if you're a philosophical thinker and the way you thought, would matter more. Whereas I think in today's day and age with social media and AI and the addiction to pornography that a lot of guys have, I heard the average age now is about 14. The average male is 14 years old looking at pornography. So, right. So they're already having a bias towards a different way of what attraction looks like. So we're just entering a different world, right? This revolution, as Dr. Israetel says, in terms of what we think is beauty.
So here was my takeaway. I also found myself agreeing with a lot of stuff that he had to say. I was surprised to hear him talk about not having personal experience, largely, very small amount, where he said maybe 10 or 20% was personal. Most of it was anecdotal from conversations. I think a small portion was actually truly what the data says, maybe 30 or 40%. When his book comes out, I'm excited to read it. I would wonder where the other Dr. Mike, if he was pushing back because he just wanted to take the opposing standpoint. I think he does do that. So I will do the most general or generous interpretation and say he was doing that. I also wondered how much you brought up something really interesting. So we're both technically minorities, and how we look at the lens from a different point, right? And I think that if you're Black or if you're any person of color, like you're almost growing up in a different world. And Dr. Mike Israetel was making jokes out of the situation with the other Dr. Mike and saying, hey, well, listen, you can sit in your chair and say this, and you're 6'3" and this and that kind of stuff. And I was just wondering, I was like, okay, well, maybe it is a little bit hard to understand, because there is something to be said about this data. I don't know how they necessarily collect this data, this lived experience. Like that's the saying, right? Your lived experience and the conversations that you had, my lived experience, other people's lived experience, Dr. Mike's lived experience, because a lot of these discussions aren't necessarily being had out in the open. And I'm thinking about what lengths people are willing to go through to cut off their love handles. And he talked about this is the most difficult. And people do that. I mean, with the nose jobs and, just plastic surgery, like they do these amazingly intense procedures and they'll go through all kinds of things. And we don't necessarily scoff at that, but when we're talking about bringing it back to Fit for TV, in order for you to go through such extreme procedures where you're going to go under the knife, you might be going through some really deep, difficult stuff that you cannot even communicate out loud. And nobody knows what that psychological internal warfare, that prison in your mind is like. And I think Dr. Mike Israetel acknowledged you have to do some deep work. And still, if you decide that you're going to do that, like this is not going to solve your problems, but some people just need that. I think about those people who signed up for, I think for lack of a better word, abuse on Fit for TV. Like, I mean, the people who signed up for season 8, like that Danny Hickle, he saw 7 seasons. He know what he was signing up for. Like he saw people puking on TV and stuff like that. But some people, it's like an escape, right? It's like when you're looking at that and you've been treated such a way, Tracy, that person, for her, it was truly an escape. Like, how are we to, if you think plastic surgery for somebody is okay, how are you to judge somebody because they're trying to run their situation? They're just using a different method. You know what I mean? So it's actually really not that different. That's why I brought this up to you, is because I think today, if The Biggest Loser tried to go on, we would destroy the idea of it. But plastic surgery is, you said this, it's bigger than ever, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
It is. And I can relate to this in a way too, because I was in a fraternity. You probably know actually some of my brothers in it, right? So I was in Delta Epsilon Psi, South Asian fraternity. And people knew the process, very militaristic. My hands were swollen. The way we got hazed was very physical. Not like beating or anything, but push-ups, crates, things like that, right? That you go through. So you ask yourself, people would ask you, why did you go through this? And rather than escape, you knew what was on the other side if you crossed, right? Popularity, getting into whatever clubs, house parties, all this stuff, getting back tests and, MCAT prep stuff and all this stuff, the college life. You knew you were going to experience the college life at a different level, substantially different level, if you were ready to endure this and get into a quote unquote brotherhood. But it's funny because if you didn't do that, especially at Temple University, being a brown guy, you were a nobody. Like you had to join a fraternity or a dance team in order to even be seen. And so that's how I, wonder, a lot of these people who get work done or whatever it might be, what is on the other side of that? If you were to do it, do they feel more seen? Do they feel like there's more opportunity, whether it's at work, family, whatever it might be? So that's something that, you made it now click in my mind. That is a new framework, at least, to kind of see and look at when people think about the trade-offs and why sign up, is what's on the other side.
To quote Monty Williams from the Western Conference Finals, I think I've done this before. Everything you want is on the other side of hard, baby. Everything you want.
Monty Williams, love it.
I don't think he's switching anymore, but yeah.
We should start every episode with that. What you want is on the other side of this episode, so finish it.
That's right. All the answers you want in life.
All the answers you want right here after this.
Amazing, man. Any parting words? I think we're going to wrap it up here. Anything, closing reflections, anything for these guys? Any final messages for the audience to walk away?
No, I think it was a good episode. If you haven't seen the documentary of Netflix, I highly recommend watching it, just getting an insight in terms of how TV is done. And I think that's why I really stopped watching any reality TV show. It's just now that you know where the money goes and how it's all staged, it doesn't make it any more entertaining, than it once was. Other than that, yeah, just kind of keep building those frameworks, keep learning about the nuance. There's a lot of factors with all of this, everything. everything's at interplay, as the world keeps evolving, money, business, TV, healthcare, pharmaceutics, all of it. So I don't think there's one right answer.
Awesome. And I'll just say that a couple of changes coming to the podcast. So if you've stuck around this far, that means you are a fan of this mode for us of communication, right? These progress notes. And if you are a fan, then good news for you. More of this is going to come towards your way, right? So we're making some changes. Darsh and I are going to be doing a lot more of these conversations. I think that, it brings value to us, brings value to you guys, hopefully. If you're not a fan of those, but you still stuck around, well, thank you. We'll try to make these better. And, just hope you guys enjoy the journey with us. So with that,
I want to just tell the audience, do let us know if you have any topics in mind or anything you want us to talk about. So,
yes,
that always makes it more fun for us.
Yeah. Questions you want us to tackle, our thoughts on current events, or anything that you want to get, we're all for it.
Cool.
All right. Till next time.
Yep. See you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Medicine Redefined. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to check out some of the additional resources in the show notes. Please also check out our social media platforms where you can find more content like this. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at MedRedefined. We also want to thank our team for the production of this podcast, Arita Yepuri on social media, Zainab Lugmani on research, and Sarah Khan for newsletter. Oh, and if you want to get similar bite-sized information delivered to your inbox every Sunday, please be sure to sign up for our newsletter. Also, if you enjoy the show, please be sure to subscribe, review, and share with anyone who you think will gain value from this as well. Now, time for the ever so important disclaimers. This podcast is intended for general public use and is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nor should be construed as medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician regarding any specific health-related issues.